Hi everyone and welcome to another astrology update. Today I'm going to be speaking about a really important and quite significant energy shift which I left out from the weekly horoscope on purpose because besides the immediate effect of this energy shift, this also has a very subtle philosophical nuance to it. And it's really open to interpretation and even contemplation. And it's not really the energy shift itself that makes this planetary transition be susceptible to speculation and a lot of philosophy, but much more the timing and how this happened. Now, I'm talking about Jupiter because it is today when Jupiter retrogrades out of the sign of Pisces and re-enters the sign of Aquarius. Right now, in this present moment when I'm making this recording, Jupiter is exactly at 0 degrees, 0 minutes and 8 seconds in the sign of Pisces, which means that very soon, within the next hour, where I live of course, it's going to retrograde back in the sign of Aquarius. And since Jupiter is always, regardless of the context, a very important planet, which influences a lot of inner factors, but at the same time it has also very profound outer influence, which means that not only is the way we're feeling, seeing the world, our greater aspirations are changing, but also the luck and everything else that Jupiter rules, for example, the law, justice, our deepest faith and life philosophy, our worldview, and even long distance, especially international travel. Well, all of these things under the rulership of Jupiter are going to take on the Aquarian type expression, because that is the part of the sky where it re-enters. Now, of course, none of this is very special. This happens every time when Jupiter changes signs, either in retrograde or direct movement. But what is really special and unusual, what Jupiter did until this moment, how it got here, or more precisely, the timing. Now, if you remember, Jupiter entered into the sign of Aquarius last December 2020, and as it entered, it immediately held the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, 0 degrees of Aquarius. This was a theme that every single astrologer was talking about, because when this celestial meeting happens, once every 20 years, it opens a new paradigm. And at the same time, last year Saturn and Jupiter conjunction was also very rare and special, because it didn't just open the cycle of the next 20 years, but also the cycle of the next 200 years, when this great conjunction is going to take place predominantly in air signs, which means that the next 200 years is ruled by the air element, the intellect, the light of our consciousness, intellectual evolution, technology, new discoveries, science, interhuman connections. This is where we will truly quantum leap as a species in the next 200 years in ways which at this present moment are totally, even unimaginable for all of us. But we don't even have to fast forward the next 200 years. Chances are that everything in our lives, in our collective society, the world, so everything which has to do with our species is already going to profoundly transform by the time we reach the end of that next 20-year cycle. So basically what I'm saying is that by the year 2040, many things in our lives, many things in the world, in our society are almost going to be unrecognizable compared to how it is in the present moment. But of course, all of this was a side note, a reminder of what Jupiter did. So what was really special is that it takes Jupiter usually around a year to transit a sign. We can say that basically that is Jupiter's modus operandi, temporarily speaking. That's the time it usually takes in order to express its energies, its symbolism, to do what it has to do in the great divine mechanism, to play its part. Yet, ever since it entered the sign of Aquarius, so December 2020, it literally whizzed through with great speed the whole of Aquarius. So in even less than half a year, at the end of May, it was already in its home sign of Pisces. And that is very, very unusual, because we have to ask the question, why nothing, not even a celestial movement? And even if that celestial movement is kind of symbolic, yet still nothing ever happens without a reason, especially a very strong spiritual, philosophical, basically the Jupiterian influence. There has to be something here of why it rushed so very quickly. And the reason for this is basically not really known. It is very open to interpretation. It is very open to each and every person with astrological knowledge, of course, very own unique viewpoint. And at the same time, this uniqueness in one's interpretation is so very Aquarian-like, because the sign of Aquarius and its modern ruler Uranus are actually the rulers of what astrology is, the branch of pseudoscience we call astrology, and of course the evolution of astrology itself. So, while I'm not able to offer anyone a very straight and clear interpretation of why this happened, what I can do is, both intuitively and through my own rationality, give you my take on this. The way I see it, while Jupiter is really, really good at starting things, at inspiring, it is a planet which usually plants seeds of ideas into our superconscious. And the superconscious is very, very fast. Very many times our superconscious, our more divine intelligence, as we can look at it that way, many times it doesn't operate with the logic that we can ground ourselves into as human beings. Sometimes it works with nonlinear logic. Something which may not be very logical and rational in the human world might be totally different in higher spheres of existence. For example, in the divine planes, in the quantum realm, it can make absolutely perfect sense there, but be a total mystery here on Earth. And the sign of Aquarius has so very much to do with the quantum world, with our higher thinking, with our more superior intelligence. And of course, Aquarius is also the future. So whatever we're evolving into, both individually but also as a species. So basically, Jupiter had a really easy job this year, in this cycle and this period, in the sense that it's not alone in the sign of Aquarius, it's there with Saturn, the ancient ruling planet of Aquarius. And Saturn holds a long-term square with Uranus, the modern ruling planet of Aquarius. So basically, this battle, this conflict, this power game between Uranus and Saturn is of course gonna be the predominant factor of change and evolution. So Jupiter, all it had to do is plant that divinely inspired seed of aspiration, inspiration, the best ideas possible within our superconscious, both individually and as a species, of course. And it can just leave the rest to Saturn. Because Saturn, on one hand, is responsible for manifestation. Jupiter can inspire, Jupiter can expand, Jupiter holds the truth basically. But whatever Jupiter conjures up cannot manifest ever without Saturn's permission, because Saturn is the guardian, so to speak, of physical reality. It is Saturn which decides what can enter our physical realm and what is way too, let's say, excessive or harmful, or perhaps we don't deserve it yet. And on the other hand, even Saturn itself moved pretty quickly, because just in half a year, Saturn was already in the second decan of Aquarius. Saturn usually spends around 3 years in a given sign, and that means that Saturn itself also rushed. So this means that there was a sense of great urgency in this part of the sky. Of course, whatever it symbolizes, our future, our rationality, our higher mental functions, human interconnectedness, the internet, society, the unity of people, of course, but at the same time it also represents our own individual uniqueness, freedom, equality, equity, humanitarianism, charitable activities, charitable purpose, the greater good of all. And it is perfectly true that we could see all of these themes play out in a very straightforward, very direct and amplified, of course, manner on the world stage and even in our individual lives these past 6 months. So while both of these planets rushed through this sign, they set the stage for so very, very many things, collectively and individually as well. But the way I see it, it was just planting the seed there. And it is only now when both Jupiter and Saturn, but especially Saturn, is retrograde, when whatever Jupiter has planted is gonna be worked on, refined, and of course completed. But the completion part will start to take place around October, when both of these planets finish their retrogrades and start moving direct, going back on the same path that they took while retrograde. Now, what this means immediately, in the now, is that whatever took place both on the world stage and in our individual lives around January, February, March, and April, that theme is gonna be resumed one way or another, and we will have to, like it or not, make progress, or at least embrace some kind of resolution. So it is only now when our futures truly start to come together like a very chaotic puzzle falling into place, where we're able to see the big picture, but at the same time also everything that would limit the puzzle from falling into place. So it's both a very important period to be able to see the future and what we're working towards, where we're transiting towards, both individually and collectively. But at the same time, all of the obstacles at this time are gonna be crystal clear. So we will have no choice but to try to find solutions, try to overcome them, or for some people, or in some situations, we do have to surrender and just find another way, find another path. And that's not really difficult with this energy, because Jupiter in Aquarius expands basically our highest cerebral activities. It is really good for brainstorming. It is really good for finding shortcuts, for finding other ways around to get where we want to be. It is really, really good for everything alternative everything new, everything never ever done before. So, this energy, like it or not, invites us to be our most ingenious selves, not just individually, but also as a species. And, this ingenuity that is so very much required in everything and from everyone in their own unique ways right now is also highlighted by the Saturn and Uranus square, where Uranus will simply not leave us alone until one way or another we'll get out of our comfort zones and try our hardest to embody our true power, our true distinctiveness based on our truth, our inner truth. But of course, what our inner truth truly is, because let's not forget that we're not really dealing with Jupiter here. Jupiter is highly subjective, a little bit like Neptune. Maybe it's not all illusion and it's not all ethereal, but it's still very, very subjective. It means that we have to determine what our inner truth is. But with Uranus and Saturn, it's very, very different, because it is absolutely true that we have to determine it. We have to give meaning to it, but based on reality, based on really objective, down-to-earth manners. Saturn is all about down-to-earth, and Uranus is basically the divine truth, but from a quantum perspective, if this makes sense. It may not be linear, but anything which has to do with Uranus can also not be fantasy and fiction and wannabe make-believe. It has to be rooted in something real or something which we strongly believe as a collective as being real. So the cocktail of these three power players, even though Jupiter himself is not really in conflict or tension either with Saturn or Uranus, but it still expands Aquarius. It expands the Aquarian expression, the energies, and the Aquarian modus operandi. So basically intellectual energy, thoughts, mind, quantum correlations, being able to anticipate the future, and of course all of the power lies in interhuman connection, even if at times Saturn limits that, because one of the expressions, the more unfavorable expressions of Saturn in the sign of Aquarius, well, it is censorship. Censorship may mean the impediment of freedom of speech, but it can also represent censorship from people meaning the human collective, society, or certain groups within the collective. For example, how people can represent Saturn, well, it's very simple. They can actively, through their behavior, controlling their own behavior, just block out the power of social media. For example, they will ignore adverts, they will ignore any kind of message, propaganda, they will simply ignore the communication of centralized power, governments, officialities, institutions, etc. They can start boycotting the pages and communication of big companies, public people, VIPs, etc. And all of these have to do with the sign of Aquarius. So it's not just centralized power, the symbol of Saturn, rules and regulations, authorities, customs and traditions, how things always used to play out, and of course the coercive power of the state. It can also represent the coercive power of the people through their behaviors. If people stop supporting something, well then whatever people stop supporting, using, believing in, giving their power and support to, that is condemned to die. May it be social media, may it be a huge international, multinational company. If people say, I don't want you in my life, well, that company has to change. in the plutonium way, if this makes sense. And what does all of this have to do with Jupiter? Because Jupiter is not directly involved in any of this. Well, Jupiter expands. It makes it much, much bigger. It makes all of these, battles, all of this conflict of Saturn and Uranus, it makes it seem way more important, way more impacting, way more, like our dear life depends on it than it really is. But that's also a blessing because it kind of reveals and it reflects the core faith of every single individual. And that in turn makes it so very easy for a really well-balanced and good-intended individual to quite rationally and logically be able to tell where it is that they belong, where it is that they aspire to be, and what doesn't resonate with them whatsoever. And that is a massive blessing. That is a way bigger blessing than any display of supernatural good fortune and divine miracles or whatever. Because sometimes it is exactly good fortune and miracles which blind us and make us way more ignorant than we should be. So having to battle constantly all throughout 2021 with our most urgent problems, limitations, Saturn of course, but at the same time trying to find every possible mean to express our individuality and inner truth, Uranus, it is definitely going to transform our lives and our futures in ways which we might have not even ever dreamed about or thought it was possible. Uranus is in the fixed sign of Taurus, value systems, but when our value systems change on a soul level and from a deep psychological perspective, that alone guarantees that the world around us will change profoundly. And this is where it is so obvious to us that it's not just us as a person, but it's almost everyone in the world, regardless of who they are. Everyone's value system was shattered. Everything that had to do with the old, with the classical, everything that basically we had to invest a lot of time and energy into just to keep in existence for the sake of tradition or whatever, that was shattered, that crumbled, and as I said, both individually and collectively. And now all we are left with is our inner truth, but that is just a Uranian expression, a thought, a truth as in that which we are able to perceive through our inner senses. So we have to do something, our own individual ways, in order to express that, to make it real, to basically force Saturn to manifest it, to accept it, to work with it. But all of this on a 3D level, well, it's painful. It is pure terror. It kind of feels like, as I said, purely on a 3D level, as if we were hit in the head and suffered a moment of amnesia, but we survived and we are absolutely okay, but we don't know who we are anymore. We might remember this and that, but what we remember is no longer specific to us. We no longer see our past, and especially our old value systems, how we used to live life, and who it is that we used to be. We no longer see it as an active part of us. We kind of see it as a skin we already shed, and that leaves us in a state of innocence, but also vulnerability, almost like the symbolism of the Fool card in tarot. We were stripped of our past experience, of our power, of our masteries, our inner structure, so to speak. So one way or another, both individually and collectively alike, we were returned into a state of innocence, naivety, and we kind of feel like we are starting a journey where we're going into an unknown, mysterious future with nothing to back us up. We can only rely on our minds, our hearts, and our instincts. And all of this on a 3D level, while it's frightening, it is sheer terror. It's almost like when you take an animal who lived all of its life in a zoo out of there and release it into the wild. Now, on one hand, that is absolutely wonderful, a beautiful fate for that animal, is it not? But the moment it gets released, well, you can imagine that the animal is not gonna enjoy it, not gonna like it. It's gonna have panic attacks. It doesn't know absolutely anything, despite the fact that that is its true home. That is where it truly belongs. Because it doesn't know anything anymore. It will need a lot of time, effort, and energy to readapt. So basically, that is how we may be feeling, in a symbolic way, of course, in the present moment, as if the gates of the zoo are open and we can walk into freedom, so to speak, into our own natural way of being. Yet, the fear of stepping into the unknown really keeps us blocked. And this is the kind of fear that we cannot have power over. This isn't just like our typical fears that we have to fight and overcome and face. This is like an instinctual reaction that we have really no power over. Of course, people who have, for example, strong Aries, strong Leo, a very strong Aquarius in their charts might find it actually quite appealing. They might find it actually adventurous because they have what it takes inside, not just to get through this, but also to use it as an opportunity. But that doesn't mean that the fear is not present in anyone's heart equally. And that fear can only be overcome with patience with ourselves and naturally self-love and self-support. Saturn in the sign of Aquarius also has a very philosophical expression where we are responsible 100% for our futures. This is where, if we are like children, well, we also have to be our own parents and make sure that we build a future for ourselves in a very responsible, diligent, and dignified way. And that also is very, very difficult in this day and age. But fortunately, this is exactly the conclusion I wanted to reach, that Jupiter re-entering this part of the sky, bringing its expansive, hopeful, optimistic, deeply philosophical, and of course divine, because Jupiter is basically the divine within us. And when this divine expression from within ourselves, our divine nobility, for example, re-enters this Aquarian formula where Saturn and Uranus are battling each other, that is like a pure saving grace, because it is actually Jupiter which says, okay, it's really painful, it is very difficult on a 3D level, that's absolutely fine, and no one blames anyone for being afraid and living that through as a moment of deep crisis. But Jupiter also elevates everything. So this is when even we're stuck in the 3D chaos, with Jupiter in the picture, we can see beyond. Jupiter with Aquarius, Aquarius is always future oriented. And Jupiter can give us this gift of prophecy, where basically it can tell us that, yes, it's painful right now, but you're doing this for your greater good. Because Jupiter is idealistic. So take idealism and add it to the symbolism of Aquarius: equality, humanitarianism, charitable activities. all for one for all. And all of those are ideals and human values which do need to be expanded, which do need to have dominance, which do need to be an integral and sacred part of Saturn. Because when Saturn itself receives this kind of upgrade, something becomes permanent, crystallized, stable. Saturn will protect this with everything, any means possible, karmically and, as I said, in physical reality alike. And when humanitarianism, when justice, truth, equality, compassion, even with things which might not really be susceptible to this, for example, technology. If we add compassion to technology, well, we have technology which serves the greater good, and that also means that we have to limit parts of it, Saturn, again, the limitations, which don't serve the greater good. So either way, this is creating something true and real based on our human values, which will become immortal, basically. So basically, Jupiter whizzed through the sign of Aquarius to plant all these very important seeds of values, which we must integrate in the deep core of our beings, even on a 3D level, Saturn in Aquarius. And now when it's retrograding back, it's finishing the job. It is completing what needs to be completed. It is manifesting what needs to be manifested. And this was a time of powerful purge when we released so many things and that left a void inside of us. And it is now when Jupiter refills that void with some kind of blessing. And from a totally different perspective, another reason why I personally think that Jupiter rushed into its home sign of Pisces, well, it's very obvious. It is not just enough for us to consciously try and solve our problems and become balanced and embody the truth and all of what I said, but we also have to do it unconsciously, because just consciously, that's half of the job done. And the sign of Pisces is all about the mysterious unconscious energies and also the home of deep spirituality, the soul, everything that we believe, our past lives. It is basically shapeless, boundless, infinite, atemporal. It is outside of the human sphere, so Jupiter had to produce very strong events in our lives, karmic events, especially after the end of May until this present moment, when it one way or another promoted healing. This wasn't easy. This wasn't like the rose-tinted, positive type of healing, which is also part of Pisces. But this was a little bit painful in a sense that it really, really evoked the past, our past wounds, our hurts, whatever deeply disappointed us in the past. And when it did that, Jupiter in the sign of Pisces has also dissolving qualities. So it gave it its best shot to dissolve it, to heal us, to recover our innocent state in the sense that before we were wounded. And this was really, really needed for us to make certain choices following the eclipses. And we still have eclipses in the end of the year, December. But anyway, we needed to embody our initial state before we were wounded in order to make choices from that place of non-wounding. Even if that non-wounding is just a memory, just like the wounding. But every single memory has certain vibes and frequencies and divine meaning to it. And this is what is helping us in a very invisible and not obvious way to make the best choices possible in anything. And then when Jupiter finishes its job, symbolically speaking, in the sign of Aquarius, all of the year 2022, it will transit its home sign of Pisces, where it will make certain very, very important and rare connections with other planets. One of these planets is going to be Venus, then the other one is Neptune. And all of these aspects will not just heal us, finish our healing, finish our psychological, spiritual regeneration and recovery, but it will also show us in quite a personal manner every single reason why we should trust our soul, why we should trust the divine, and why it is absolutely okay not to be in control of everything in life, because life can just sort itself out. But of course, that is the big picture, that will be the theme of 2022. And before I finish, I would just like to mention one of the immediate aspects that Jupiter will hold right now with another very important power player. Well, as Jupiter re-enters the sign of Aquarius, meaning that it's going to be anaretic, the very last degree of that sign 29 of Aquarius, it will hold an opposition with Mars at 29 degrees of Leo, the opposite sign of Aquarius. And what this means is that Jupiter is really going to expand the symbolism of Mars in the sign of Leo, an anaretic Mars, which is extremely intense and focused, and it kind of represents the pure desire and passion and the flames of our hearts. The sign of Leo is the heart and the heart space and the truth within the heart, while the sign of Aquarius, it is the mind, the head, and a very rational kind of approach to what the truth is. So now when Jupiter opposes Mars, it expands that Mars, it makes it even more fiery, it makes it even more passionate, it makes it desire what it wants in the most intense way possible, if this makes sense. This can be very, very good and delightful for some people, while it can be not so good and favorable for other people. One of the most positive expression is everything that has to do with love and passion. If you're passionate about something, if you desire something pure-heartedly, if that makes sense, today and in the next couple of days, that desire is gonna be extremely magnetic. Chances are we will have no choice but to take some kind of action. And when it comes to matters of love, the sign of Leo has so much to do with romance as well. We might have a very strong moment of courage, bravery, self-expression, and Mercury is also in the sign of Leo now, which means that we will be able to express it, speak it out, and, any declaration, especially love, appreciation, anything that has to do with desires and passions, are gonna be very, very persuasive, so you might get what you want. The negative expression, however, well, it's anger, it is hatred, it is intolerance, it is everything that irritates you. It is basically the most unfavorable expression of the sign of Leo. As they say, there is only a very fine line between love and hate. Those two feelings, yes, they are opposites of each other, but they have the same essence, if that makes sense. So this can mean violence, this can mean gestures out of sheer anger that we might regret later on, and Mercury being here as well, angry words, getting our point through, our true feeling through, in a very assertive and verbally aggressive way. And without a shadow of doubt, we are gonna see this on the TV, social media, any kind of public communication where there is gonna be a lot of conflict verbally. And under this energy, even offensive language coming from people who you would never ever expect it from. So this concludes today's update. I do hope that you enjoyed it. And I would really like to suggest anyone who has at least a basic knowledge of astrology to just contemplate and philosophize yourself. What do you think is the reason why Jupiter whizzed through so very quickly the sign of Aquarius? What do you think its divine purpose was? And at the same time, it can also be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. What was started in your life around the end of April, the beginning of May, the first 2 weeks of May, which really seemed like something truly beautiful, very promising, like a certain breakthrough, but then suddenly stopped, and you might have perceived that as a setback or whatever. It is that which might resume very quickly in the weeks and even months to come. That which may have seemed like almost a certain success, breakthrough, something truly wonderful happening to you, and of course it stopped. That might still resume and become something way bigger and better than you could ever imagine in the weeks and months to come. So with this being said, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, bye for now.